dispossession, how it is that I have all this knowledge but still know nothing about life and reality. Hi, my name is Wani. I'm a philosophy student at La Sorbonne, and this series is based on what I've read from Wolff's Notre Humanité, from Aristotle to neurosciences. If you survived the second video, congratulations. Welcome to the third, which is where we're going to talk about how social reality defines man. I will be talking about the structuralist paradigm, like a brief outline, and then I'll be talking about how it is anti-Cartesian, and then how it is anti-Naturalist. Look how scary my notes are. I try to segment things off in a way that makes sense, but then I ran out of space because we live in a finite world where paper does not just shift to making things happen. Let us just begin with structuralism. I like always starting with like Wikipedia just to show the broad understanding. Wikipedia's definition is that structuralism is a methodological approach primarily in the social sciences that interprets elements of human culture by ways of relationship to a broader system. It works to uncover the structural patterns that underlie all the things that humans do, think, feel, and perceive. You're gonna see how this is so limited. Okay. The general paradigm of structuralism, we have main authors plus the segments. Economics, Levi Strauss. Unconscious, which is Lacan and Freud. Social, which is Bourdieu and Foucault. Phenomenological, which is Heidegger. Language, which is Wittgenstein. I mean, I obviously pick Wittgenstein. There's also Benveniste and Saussure. And then science, which is quantum mechanics, of course. That's my preference. And then critique of intellectualism, philosophy of time, which is Bergson. I won't go through each of them, but it's just to give you like a broad outline. The different structures in this paradigm of structuralism and how it is that it's a mess. In this paradigm, based on all these different subsections of what it means to be in a social reality, we have many different definitions of man. Again, if you survived the previous video of Descartes and Aristotle, you would know that Descartes, it is defined by the knowing being, and Aristotle in terms of natural object. I definitely recommend that maybe this video seems much more exciting, but you will only really understand the depths of how it is that this is important if you understand the basic arguments of how it is that this conception of man leads to this conception of science, and therefore this conception to reality, because what the science do, science is supposed to inform us about reality. Bref, moving back. Man can be seen as the subject of his actions. Man can be seen as an agent in history. Man can be seen as an actor in the social scene. Man can be seen as an individual of psychology. Man can be seen in terms of a collectivity, so sociology. And then man can be seen as a species, so in the paleo-anthropological view. This concept is transversal, so basically you imagine the subject, which is man. Like, let's just say economics, unconscious, sociology, phenomenology, and language, and all these lines that run through the page. And then you have the subject, which is one that touches all these lines. So that's the transversal concept of the structure. In this way, the object, in terms of the individual, does not exist, because it is not this one thing in and of itself. It is just this thing that touches all these different structures. So it doesn't exist for itself, by itself, in their own right, but only by the difference in which it is separated, which is the different structures, and the relations which it is linked. So how it is that it relates to its social position within society in terms of what language they speak, relationships they have socially, in relation to our understanding of what the unconscious is. In this way, the structural man doesn't exist because he doesn't have an identity. He is without unity. What is man? Man is a part of social facts, cultures, evolution of society, the conscious functioning, which is psychology, the unconscious functioning, which is psychoanalysis, and then of languages and articulated language. In French, we have langue, which is, French, German, Italian, English, etc., etc. But there's articulated language in terms of the formalized language, which is something else. But when I say language twice, it's different things in French. Linguistics, it's closer to linguistics than just spoken language. So let's move on to the second part of the video. And again, I implore you, please watch the second video of this series, just so that you understand the consequences, but whatever, do what you will. Anti-Cartesian. So, quick recapitulation. The Cartesian man is transparent to himself. Il est tel qui s'apparaît et il s'apparaît tel qu'il est. So he is one that appears, and he appears as he is. So there's that transparency. And he's l'auteur responsable de ses actes. He's an author who is responsible for his own actions. So we go from this transparency, even if he has knowledge, even if it's super minimal, he has some knowledge. Even if you doubt something, it's still knowledge compared to complete ignorance because you're sure that you doubt something. And then liberté, so he has the freedom because he's the author of his own actions. Going on to the social sciences, this is what introduces relativity and the unconscious. Relativity basically just means that you don't know because whatever you're seeing is based on where you're at, or there's just a lot of things in the way that you have no transparency of what you know. So you don't know what you don't even know. You can think of this as the parallax argument, which is that everything that you see, it's inescapable that you only see it in one specific angle. And it's not compensable with other angles. The other thing about unconscious, it's like, are you really free with your own actions? Because, you know, like you think you want to do what you want to do, but it's actually some childhood repressed need that was like started off like in in like your adolescence. Tangent, but like I went into this play and it, you know, when you say like, oh, the unconscious is something that starts bothering us or starts forming itself at a specific age, there was this play that just said that it started from birth. And I was just like, oh my God, this gives us absolutely no potential possibility to actually have any relationship with what we believe is our life. But yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about the unconscious. And if you are curious to know, I really like Lacan because I read like one of his very known essays. I think it's like something familial. I'll put the name somewhere, but it's in Autre Écrit, which is a very interesting read. But at some point, you just have to take a step back. You are now not a free actor, but you're an actor in terms of the collective. So your motivation is constituée à partir de ces actes et des discours des différents agents impliqués dans tel processus ou dans telle institution sociale. So your motivation is constitutive as part of actions and discourse of other agents implied in your discourse, implied in this process of your motivation, or how it is that you think you want to act in the world, and whatever social institution, so like marriage. The idea here is like you're not only no longer author in your actions because you do not understand your unconscious, because the whole point of unconscious is that you can't access it. And the second is that you are not a free actor because you're only an actor in terms of the collective, which means that your acts are already defined and determined by your relations to other people. Super great, very happy and helpful. And, you know, the transparency of this comes to, okay, how can you say that you have a transparency of what is, if how it is that you're informed in the way that you act isn't even of your own hand? So whatever you have is basically never an immediate given of our consciousness. In this sense, social sciences claims neutrality. Neutrality is not the same as objectivity, but it just means that we're no longer based on the subject as the supreme sovereign being that knows what they're doing and has a minimal understanding of the world and is free to act and is responsible for their actions. So this neutrality à l'égard de l'objet, l'homme, incapable de porter celui en jugement de valeur, qui serait contraire à la scientificité. In terms of its object, which is man, who is incapable to bring of himself a judgment of value, which is contrary to his scientificity, which is basically contrary to the scientific element of himself, which is the method in which he approaches or understands reality. Before I had that question of like, how is it that man can actually claim to be able to objectively hold the position, the legitimate position of studying itself? Here it's saying that it can't. So you can't have the subject in terms of a whole unity. You can only study it, how do you say, like NX, like on the side of like understanding it through the structures and not directly man itself. Oh, the light. And in this way, we arrive at this opacity. This opacity that we're not looking at the subject itself because the subject cannot arrive at itself, and the subject cannot even arrive at its own consciousness because nothing is given to its consciousness directly, and everything is determined either by the unconscious or social relations. So, tout produit ou production qui suppose l'existence d'une conscience, all products of production that supposes the existence of a consciousness, mais dont elle pose justement qu'il peut s'expliquer sans recourir à cette conscience. But it is exactly or justly this that it poses, in which that it can explain without talking about the consciousness. So it's like, I'm going to explain the fact that you can't get your consciousness because there's the unconscious and social relations. But in the end, we never actually go into understanding what consciousness is because we are no longer in the Cartesian definition of man and therefore the definition of reality. This is the condition of the negative methodology in which the only positive trait of man is that he is of the non-subject. So again, the fact that we go through him through the structures, the only thing that we have positively, like real, effectively, that we can look and study and identify in a scientific way is the structures and not man himself, and that's how man is defined as the non-subject. So the consciousness is either a place of ignorance or a lack, which is error, and that's how we get to the abused man. So when we say like tu t'abuses in French, like you abuse yourself, it's basically like you're going too far or you're tricking yourself, or it's just you're on the wrong path. Human sciences consist on filling in this gap of ignorance because the subject does not know. What the subject can access spontaneously is necessarily deceiving. Forget God that like gets you on the right path. We're just stuck. The interesting thing about this is obviously I'm much more for the linguistic violence because there were like three main things that caused violence according to my epistemology professor. One was obviously psychoanalysis or the unconscious. The other one was so negligible that I don't remember now. And the third is, sociology. And then the third is linguistics. And according to my professor, linguistics is the most violent. Bienvenue in de la subjectivité dans le langage. Bienvenue in of subjectivity in language. C'est donc et par le langage que l'homme se constitue comme sujet. It is in and by the language that man constitutes himself as subject. Parce que le langage seul fonde en réalité, dans sa réalité, qui est celle de l'être, le concept d'ego, because it is language itself that founds or gives ground or establishes in its truth, which is that of the being, the concept of ego. Let me continue, it'll make more sense. This idea of what is deceiving is this illusion, the Cartesian illusion. So here's the illusion, okay? Descartes thinks that parce que je pense que je peux le dire, it's because I think that I can say it. But in reality, linguistic reality, parce que je peux dire je, it's because I can say je, que je peux dire, that I can say. Même si je crois que je suis une substance pensante. Like, to the point that I even can think that I'm a thinking subject. It's like the illusion is so deep that you don't even realize that you need language for you to even trick yourself into thinking that you're a thinking subject. Like, that's how violent it is. Moving forward is il ne peut penser ce qu'il peut dire et parce que certaines langues indépendantes de lui lui permettent de le dire. He can only think because he can say, and it's because a particular language independent of him allows him to say it. So what came first is language, and it's not completely, I wouldn't say like bullshit, but not complete in isolation, because what we're learning about Hegel right now is that the subject is a performative effect of language. So language comes first and then the subject appears or manifests because we have language, which is so counterintuitive but interesting to think about in general. There was like one person in class who's just like, this is so abstract, I hate it. Like, we were learning about the slave and the master, and he's just like, what, so I eat like the knife? And I'm just like, why are you so disturbed by an analogy? It's really not that big of a deal. So welcome to philosophy, and now we're back in the room. The bonus part is that I actually thought about something, because this was the last class I took from my class in Lingoda. If you don't know, I have this video where I introduced this idea that I wanted to perfect my French. I wanted to read German and I want to speak Italian. But long story short, the last class I had with them was on linguistic relativity. And it's really interesting in terms of like, okay, obviously it's a benign question for me because I've been doing the study of a philosophy of language for a long time. But what was really interesting was this idea of like, okay, yeah, can you only have like a certain Weltanschauung, like a certain like point of view of the world because your language is formed in that way, and like there are words in German that doesn't exist in English and then in Japanese, and then you can kind of see like culturally what is important to a specific culture and another, and that's why they give it like a lot more definitions for a specific thing because that was something that they really cared about, etc., etc. But then the question then becomes like, obviously we're not limited in a specific way because we do have the capacity to learn different languages. So the strong vision of linguistic relativity or language relativity is void because I can grow my perspective on things by learning multiple languages. But what if we had one human being that had all of the languages? In the end, can we say that he actually can escape any of them? First off, I would say no in general because we all start with a maternal language, Maybe you live in a country that speaks multiple languages or in a household that spoke multiple languages, so then you can't really identify which is your maternal language, because a lot of us like can forget our maternal language. And I also don't know, like, would you consider maternal language being the language that your parents speak? But then, you know, you live in a culture that speaks a different language and you grew up with a different language. How would you pick between three languages? Is it by frequency, or the one that you attach to the most, or the one that you decide to cultivate in a specific way? But the point is that we always start off with the maternal language, and then everything else is in relation to this maternal language. So even if you say that you learn all the languages in the world and you are not restricted to only one point of view, just to cap this off in a very long-winded way, you, in the end, can you say that you can ever escape language? Even if you knew all the languages, could you ever escape or think beyond any of these structures? And then the reply from the professor is just like, that is interesting. We need a very mature person who knows all the languages to have enough of a recul, like enough of a step back to be able to assess this question. So I'll leave it in the air because it's easy to just say no, but I just thought it was an interesting question. So this, I believe, caps off anti-Cartesian. So let's move on to the third and final section of the series, which is the anti-Naturalist. It is a lie because I actually have a summation. Let's move on to the third part of this video, which is the anti-Naturalist. So the anti-Naturalist, and you're wondering, like I did probably, why it is that we talked about anti-Cartesian when he comes after Aristotle. And if you watch my second video, which I asked you to really nicely and politely to do so, is that anti-Naturalist is about Aristotle, and Aristotle comes before Descartes. So let me just begin, and I think this is probably one of the most exciting part of this video and the whole series, but again, watch the second one to appreciate it. All right, the naturalist illusion is la croyance en la puissance de la nature sur le social. It is the belief that there is a power of the natural on the social. The idea here is not simply that man is not reducible to nature. A quick reference to Durkheim. He talks about how le social, the social or social facts, impacts or presses on us as heavy, or works on us or determines us in the same way as natural laws do. But he uses the word comme, so it's not the same as, but it is similar to. It's as inescapable and it is as omnipresent as natural laws. But that being said, when we say that the natural and the social are incommensurable, it's just much more of like, don't pretend that just because it's a social construction that it doesn't have an impact, a physical positive impact on us the same way as a natural law would have. The second thing that I wanted to say about this is that because man possesses a specificity or property that is emergent, respectively the unconscious, the social, and culture, which is what makes it objectively distinct from other natural beings. So this is more radical than the shift between Descartes and Aristotle in terms of the fact that, like, before, oh yeah, man is a part of nature because he has logos. Again, watch the video. And the second one, which is like, man is absolutely not part of animals because man can think, which is opposite or contrary to animality. Here we're saying that man is part of nature, but it has a whole nother layer of reality as an emergent layer, which is the unconscious, the social language. And here I'm gonna go in through four different ways of showing you how it is that we are distinct from what is specifically natural. So you have the natural instinct of animals, and he makes this analogy with like how we eat food. So animals can eat things raw, cru dans la nature, eat raw things from nature, and they reproduce the most possible with a partner, so they have like erratic sexual encounters. They don't think that much, you know. We would say, at least like from our point of view. This is in opposition with institution sociale, like social institution. So the analogy with food is we cook. The idea is that if we cook, we constrain ourselves to elementary norms, the different ways that we cook, the different ways that we eat. And in the same way of this like self-constraint, we constrain ourselves to marriage, we constrain ourselves to exogamique, I don't know the word in English, exogamic marriage, but it's basically saying that you marry outside of your clan. And this also is the prohibition of incest for most parts of the world. That is the first distinction, natural instinct and social institution, constraint, choices, and cultures and norms. Then the second is Durkheimian terms, the difference between spontaneous evolution and devenir proprement humain. So the becoming of a human. With evolution of natural species, the nature does not, I'm translating from French, so it's a bit, nature does not have history. It is subjected only to simple physical processes. It just develops over time, and it's not really like a history in terms of the becoming human sense. As in, it just happens. Rain falls, seasons change, and it's just is. But then with humans, we can direct and change history. We can become something. So, le devenir proprement humain des sociétés est ce qui reconstitue l'histoire. So, it is the becoming that is proper to human societies. It is what reconstitutes history. History is a very loaded word, and we're already at 33 minutes before this edit, and I'm not done yet, so I'm gonna tack that in a different video maybe. The next opposition that is to be made, which is one of my favorites, is between besoin animal, animal need, and désir humain, human desire. So here we're in psychoanalysis. Animal need is natural, biological. Hunger, thirst, route, which is cuffing, you know, like being coupled. I know it's really cute. You think of otters holding hands and like flowing down the streams, which actually goes against the first thing about like instinct naturel, where they just like get it on with every single being in front of them. You know, there are a lot of monogamous animals as well, but I don't think they have the institution of marriage. The idea and the main interesting thing is that this need, this biological natural need, qui s'achève par la satisfaction et qui s'épuise dans la possession de leur objet. So once this is achieved, once this is satisfied by its possession, it's no longer there. It's like épuisé, it's like it's gone. Whereas for human desire, it is indéfini, inassouvi, refoulé, sublimé. So this human desire is undefined, we don't know what we want, is inassouvi, you can't satisfy it, never ending. Once you get it, you want more, you want something else. You know, think about like our capitalistic structure, where it's like never enough, especially when you're a type A achiever, it's a suffering. Refoulé, it's like repressed either because you're not supposed to have it or you know you can't have it, so you suppress it yourself. And sublimé, something that we kind of put onto a different object. I talk a bit about sublimation in like this really old presentation that, well, it's really old, like last year, like presentation that I did on art, which is how we sublimate violence onto a painting so that we relieve ourselves of it. There's this thing that's called like, what's the term? It's like where Freud said, I only learned Freud because I had to pass or to get a good grade in epistemology. But it's the idea that if we can't have our needs satisfied, it becomes so much. And this energy in us, it's like has to do with thermodynamics, where it's like for us to survive, we need to release this energy, and we do it with hallucinations. So in a way like that also is like sublimation. It's something that we do to relieve ourselves of something that we can't keep anymore on the inside. So the human desire is reverted on itself and its representations under the displaced, condensed, and symbolic forms. When something is symbolic, it never disappears. I don't think people understand how important language, specifically symbols, are. Corporality, contingency, facts of life is probably the most transient thing in the world. I was gonna say in the fucking world, but it is. But symbols and symbolic material is essence. it's shit that like stays forever. And it brings me to my next part, which is l'homme structurel ne vit dans la nature, il habite dans un monde symbolique. Man does not live in nature, he lives in the symbolic world. If we look at this last opposition that I want to make here, which is signal naturel, a natural signal, and signe humanité, the sign of humanity, is that in signal naturel, it's la communication animale, tout signal réfère à une situation et une seule. So it is the animal communication where all signals refer to one situation and one alone. Like a dog barks for food, there's an enemy, they want attention, like it's specifically one reference. Whereas in signe humanité, it is arbitrary, it is équivoque, which basically means that it has two senses or it doesn't just have one meaning. And it is selon les langues et permet une infinité de messages. So it depends on language and it allows for an infinity of messages. So if you live in monde symbolique, you can kind of see how we're fucked. In terms of like, how do you orient yourself in this vastness of you don't know? Imagine like your entire life or our entire lives within this symbolic structure, not being able to identify any sense of anything because nothing has a singular sense at any moment. So that is why there is linguistic violence. The last thing that I just want to talk about is just a bit more about symbolism, and then I'll talk about my summation. But the first thing about symbolism is functional symbolism, and this is based on Piaget, Jean Piaget. Essentially, the symbolic function is something that goes beyond the first stage of development of the child, which is sensory motor, like how you move your body and how you relate to reality based on, touching things, putting things in your mouth. When I was looking at this word imitation différenciée, obviously I think about art. One of the most beautiful things that I heard in aesthetics is why we have paintings or why we have art is because we like to see. In French, there's this word regarder, so to look, but regarder, garder is to keep. Regarder is to keep again. So when you look at something, it's because you want to have it again. And in that way, when you have a portrait, it's because your lover is at war. And it's about this capacity to keep in possession this absence, to have in possession of something as a result of its absence. So yeah, this is one of the reasons I really like aesthetics. The point is that like it's no longer natural because it's not a pure imitation of nature. Dessin, the fact that we can like decide, and le faire semblant. So faire semblant is just in the end like, oh, you're not being natural, you're acting. You're trying to create something else, you're trying to transform something, or you're trying to convey something that is not immediate in the current state. The second is symbolic in terms of Lacan. This symbolic is not one that opposes the real, but it opposes the imaginary. I'm doing a book club. We're finishing off The Sublime Object of Ideology, and it is a perk for those who are supporting me on Patreon. And I guess this is a great moment to thank everyone who is deciding to support my work. I will let you know that once I reach my goal of Patreon support, I will remove mid-roll ads across all my videos on my channel. So I thank you for your consideration. Not to go too much into it because it's extremely complicated about the symbolic, but the definition here, or what is given here, is that it is caractérisé par la logique du signifiant. It is characterized by the logic of the signifier. It is not a game of imaginary identifications. And this signifiant is just propre au langage. It's only possible for human beings, essentially. And when we say signifiant, it's like a reference or a meaning. It's much broader than that, but all I'm saying is that the idea of symbolic is not about the opposition between fiction and reality, which is, again, if we go back to the fact that we live in a symbolic world, we live in this world. It is something that affects us materially. The last thing is symbolic violence, and I have to include it because it's Bourdieu. And he calls it trait propre au social. It is a trait that is specifically social. Capacité qu'on les domine de faire passer la domination, notamment culturelle et symbolique, pour légitime. So the capacity to dominate or to pass this domination as legitimate. If you haven't watched my video on politeness is oppression, 10 out of 10 recommend. But it's just the very simple thing of like how it is that we actually believe that the way things are socially is the way things are legitimately. Had a discussion with my friend about the idea of what is natural and what is a norm, and I'm very strict. This is why I like Schrödinger, because Schrödinger made this really good simple thing click in my brain, which is whatever is abnormal is just something that doesn't last. Whatever is normal or the norm is literally the last change that has made it until now. So it's not normal in terms of natural, it's normal in terms of a norm that we've upheld up to this point. So I finished this third part, and I'm going to give you my little summation. Page 118. The social has to appear natural for it to appear necessary. And yet, if we say that it's social, it then appears as what it is, which is arbitrary, contingent, and then it seems modifiable. The idea of transformable, there's this idea that the social construct is not real. There's this quote that I mentioned, and this is one of the dissertations that I want to share, but I included this quote, which is about the human construct. And Nathalie Heinrich says, parce qu'elle est une construction humaine qu'elle s'impose à nous et non pas en dépit de cela. It is because it is a human construct that it imposes on us and not despite of it. Yeah, there's just something to think about it. And again, like going back to the idea of ideology, which I talked a bit about in my video, Hollywood to Hegel, but I'm just going to continue. Or in the point of view of structuralist sociology, of anti-Cartesian, it is to show that the social order, far from being arbitrary or contingent, is necessary. It is because it is social, which means that it is inscrit, it is inscribed or a part of the objective structures independent of the will of the agents according to their constitutive illusion. It is that it is not necessary because it's not depending on his subjectivity or his will. To wrap this up, we have the anti-Cartesians, which basically highlights the individualist illusion of free consciousness, and that there is a nécessitarisme social. There's a necessitism, social necessitism. And we have the anti-Naturalist, which is something that highlights the biological illusion that, we can actually compare ourselves or have any kind of notion of naturalism in terms of how it is that we function or how we identify reality. But what we have is the necessitism of l'arbitraire, what is arbitrary, the freedom of movement of devenir. The fact that nothing just goes because it rains, nothing fully depends on seasons, we can make choices despite of that. They seem like they oppose themselves, like anti-Cartesian and anti-Naturalist, but again, they both function at the same time, I believe. And I also do believe depending on institutions and political governments, which one they want to believe in, they both exist. People just pick which ones that they align with and then they run with it, and they have consequences on how society continues to structure itself. So what does this mean for science? If we don't know anything, if we're in this world of symbolism, and if we are in this world of ignorance, and if we're not even defining ourselves based on ourselves, what does this mean for our foundation of reality? And I know there's this movement of neurosciences and Derrida. Again, as I mentioned in my first video, it's not really something that I'm really familiar with, so that's why I didn't really talk about it. But I don't think we're past this movement of structuralism. I just think that every time you have a question, you go online, try to find some consensus, like with Reddit, and just whichever first 5 different results, you try to see if they make sense to you. The violence would kind of be you have no idea what anything is happening, and you have to rely on other people to tell you what the world is, whether it be news or your psychiatrist. I think that's where we have this innate sense of dispossession of our sense of self and the sense of reality. The next video, I don't know, I have multiple videos in mind, but one of it is about ChatGPT. Right now, the title is ChatGPT, We're All Doing It. And I think it plays a big part into how it is that we start. Because again, it's an epistemological question. It started with this reading that I did on Google as an epistemological tool. And I can really see and I can really draw lines between that and how ChatGPT functions, or at least our relationship with it. And I do think if that is the way that we are now informing ourselves on reality as a, what is it called? An expert surrogate. Because with ChatGPT, we're no longer trusting people who actually studied, and we just go well, ChatGPT told me this thing, and therefore what you're saying is completely negated, is frightening to me. I mentioned a lot in our calls for Patreon that I think my biggest fear in the future is that we're just going to be stuck on this idea that if it's not online, it doesn't exist, or it's not true. While understanding that a lot of books, especially older books, have not been transcribed, or also will not just appear in your searches if you're not a person who has been algorithmically designed to be someone that they would serve this information to you. And that would just basically mean that people who actually have a lot of knowledge would be treated like crazy people because everyone else can't find it on ChatGPT. So on that beautiful note, I thank everyone over here who has decided to support my work, and I thank you for your attention, and I'll talk to you in the next video.